Hey, everybody. My guest on the show today is Matt Krayton. Matt Krayton is the principal and founder of Publitics, and we're going to get into a lot more about what that is. I always love it. We're sharing a time zone. We could probably drive to each other's house, which is not always the case. I talk to people around the world. You're maybe an hour and 15 minutes from me right now, and so we're almost like neighbors, Matt. But welcome. So good to have you here today.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, excellent. So Matt, let's start out let's just talk, where are you in the world, and anything else you want us to know about you as we kick off here today?
Sure. Yeah, I am in beautiful New Jersey. So as you noted, not too far from where you're at. And in today's age of Zoom, where you could talk to someone halfway across the world, we are basically neighbors. So
we're basically neighbors. Yeah.
There you go. So I'll come over and ask for a cup of sugar next time I'm baking something.
Perfect. I love it.
There you go. So yeah, beautiful, not so sunny New Jersey at the moment, but yeah, this is where our headquarters are. This is where I live in northern New Jersey. So yeah, that's where I'm spending my time.
Excellent. So let's talk now about what's gotten you here today. And we've never met each other until 15 minutes ago. We were just catching up a little bit about what you do and getting to know each other off before we press record. So you're the principal and founder of Publitics. So let's talk about what that means, what the company does, and what's led you to becoming the principal and founder of that company.
Sure. Yeah, that's a really good question. One that I often field from family. In fact, every holiday, right? Every holiday, and this is good practice for the Easter holiday coming up, because I'll be sitting around the table, and I'm sure somebody will look at me and say, "So, what is it that you do?" Again, like
happy to be of service to your family.
This is great.
That's what we're here for.
So I'm going to work it out right now. So we'll get the script straight before I walk in there. So Publitics is a full service public affairs, public relations, strategy, and political consulting firm. I started the business back in 2011. So the journey to this point is kind of interesting. And I like to say a little bit of a sort of quintessential millennial story. So I graduated from undergrad in 2010, did my master's 2011. And then, a couple years before that, there's a little financial meltdown, So
I heard. Yeah.
Yeah. It seems so far off, right? We've been through a financial meltdown, global pandemic, all sorts of other stuff. So everything kind of seems a little surreal at the moment. But anyway, that's life. So my original plan was to become a high school social studies teacher. So that was the plan. So I did political science and history undergrad, did master's in education, got certified to teach, did the whole student teaching thing. And confluence of things kind of led me in a different direction. So number one is there were no jobs, or very few jobs, right? So at that point, a bunch of teachers had been laid off in New Jersey, where I was, living at the time, and I'm still here. So when you're applying for jobs, you were up against hundreds of experienced educators who had been in the classroom already. So I was like, oh, this is, so you're submitting hundreds of applications anywhere that, will give you the time of day. So I went through that process for a little while. But as I was student teaching, I realized that I liked to teach, but I did not like the paperwork that went along with it, right? So the increasing amount of paperwork and standards and testing and all of that. So the act of teaching, whole lot of fun. Helping students, whole lot of fun. Paperwork, not so much fun. So I was like, you know what? Maybe I just won't do this. For a combination of factors. So I just took the first job that came along, which was doing fundraising work for my alma mater. So as you can imagine, this is wild. So I was brought in with another gentleman. So there were two campuses. I went to Fairleigh Dickinson University in New Jersey. There are two campuses. So they brought one of us in from one campus and another recent grad from another campus. And our job was to prospect and then call young alumni for donations.
Fun.
Oh yeah. So as you can imagine, student loans, financial crisis, lack of jobs, all of those things, people had a shocking creativity with which they approached telling me to do certain things to myself, right? Like, jump out a window or, go play in the street or pound, and I won't even mention many of the things.
And we're also talking about New Jersey folks too, which
predominantly
have a very special type of language as a fellow New Yorker, that they'll tell you very straight how to do things.
Oh yeah, definitely. No, there was no shying away from getting to the point. So and again, I totally understood it. So we would call
Yeah.
through these lists of people. That didn't go particularly well. And 10 months later, we were both laid off due to budget cuts. So I'm like, oh man, what am I going to do now? So in grad school, I had gotten some experience working for a polling institute called the Public Mind Poll at Fairleigh Dickinson. So that I got some experience. I mean, I had always had some interest in politics and public policy and all of those things. So, but it was mainly academic, an academic interest. I'd done, some political science work, and there was a lot of theoretical stuff, some practical, but never worked on a campaign in my life. But I had worked for a semester or two at the Public Mind Poll, where I got acquainted with how public opinion research was conducted, kind of got a sense of how the public thinks about certain issues, how to run polls. So I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting. So I was like, you know what? I've always liked politics. Let me just become a political consultant. Now that sounds crazy, right? Just be like, oh, I'm just going to do this. So, but I did. I incorporated, filed the paperwork and went out searching for clients. So I was fortunate enough to land 2 campaigns. One was a very local, low budget campaign, and the other one was a congressional race. And I had thought to myself at the time, I'm like, I'm young. I have no experience. Why would anyone hire me to do any of this stuff? And I was like, well, I'm young. And social media is like a thing that people are kind of interested in now, like Facebook and digital. So like, I'm going to be a digital consultant. So I went to these campaigns and I'm like, I'll do your digital media. And of course, what ended up happening was that the campaign manager on one of the campaigns was like, oh, well, okay, you're young. I'm sure you know what you're doing. I'm like, yep. Sure.
For sure. 100%.
Yep. So I taught myself a lot about digital media. Was able to. So it was the other thing was it was bound to be a losing campaign. Like I just knew that. So anything that would be competitive, even remotely competitive, or kind of on the fence of whether or not the candidate could win, would never have hired me. But a losing campaign, you have a lot more latitude to try stuff. You can take more risks. So that was pretty cool. The guy did lose ultimately, but I learned a whole lot on that campaign. We ended up winning the local campaign though, which was
nice.
Kind of an interesting surprise, actually. So that helped network into other places. And ever since then, the business has been growing. We've done, campaigns on all the way up to the sort of national level. And then in 2014, brought in a business partner, Henry, who then we started to expand into other places as well. So doing more corporate work for nonprofits, advocacy groups. So you name it, we've pretty much done it. So ever since then, we've been growing and been diversifying and have been very fortunate to work on some pretty cool projects over the years.
Yeah. So you didn't know what you're doing, yet you've grown a nice, thriving business without knowing what you're doing. That's something. There's something to be said for that, Matt. I have a question about the term political consultant. Hear about that a lot in the news. For those of us who don't live in that world, which I certainly don't, what does that actually mean?
That's a really good question. So the way that it is presented in the news is sort of this monolithic thing, like political consultant, right? So you're some person sitting in a room, providing this, sage counsel to whoever will listen to you. In reality, it's a little bit more specialized for the most part. So the super like visible political consultants that you see, like James Carville, for example, sort of like a messaging guru type, or David Axelrod, of the Obama campaign fame. They were very much in that space, but political consulting is a pretty diverse field. So if you look at marketing, for example, there are different things in general that you could do in marketing. You could be, do organic, like social media, or you could do paid pay-per-click type advertising. You could do content. So political consulting is similar in that you have like media consultants who handle like a lot of the TV ads or direct mail specifically. So there are specific firms that handle direct mail exclusively. You have polling firms who exclusively do polling, and digital media firms who do digital media exclusively. And even within that, there are different subspecialties. So you have people who do email fundraising specifically. So, they help. I'm sure, you've gotten, in some of your audience have gotten those obnoxious emails that you never signed up for.
Matt, I just have to tell you, I've gotten multiple text messages in the last weeks from my friends Kamala and Joe. Yeah, they're in they're DMing me and inviting me for coffee, and and then obviously emails, from Blue, whatever it's called, or if you're a Republican side, like where you're like, I didn't sign up for this. I do have a question about this for you shortly, but it continue. That since we've got you here in your expertise, you mentioned something, but please.
Yeah, the text messages, the emails. So all of those are subspecialty. Persuasion advertising online, doing that sort of stuff is a subspecialty. So, and then there are things that people call like general consultants who sort of help set up the campaign, develop management, build out structure. So it really depends on the size of the campaign, what you need. From our perspective, or in our firm, we do almost everything except for fundraising. So we don't really do fundraising. There's specific political consultants who focus on fundraising and compliance. So they sit with the candidate. Yep. Candidate calls through lists and asks for money and all of that stuff. So we don't do any of that. Compliance, they make sure all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed when it comes to filing with whatever, campaign finance authority they need to file with. And then we don't do like field too. So there's a whole subspecialty of consultants who focus on door knocking, volunteer organization, getting paid canvassers out, getting paid, an army of paid people out in the streets to knock doors and activate voters or have conversations with the voters and then phones and stuff like that. So we don't do that, but we do all the media stuff. So we do polling, media, digital, and general consulting. So that's sort of what we do. But again, and certain firms specialize in certain things. We're pretty much a Swiss Army knife when it comes to that. But,
nice.
It's a pretty broad term. Yeah.
So who is it that hires you inside of a campaign?
It depends. So sometimes it's the candidate directly. So you're having ground floor conversations with the candidate directly. Sometimes you are referred to a campaign manager. So they already have like staff. So we're not like staff on campaigns anymore. That was something that we all kind of did running around in our early days where you manage campaigns or you're like directly paid by the campaign. Now we're just consultants, right? So we do a number of campaigns, every cycle. So sometimes it's through a campaign manager. Other times, you're referred through different groups or campaign committees that help groups of candidates win their races or run their races. So it really depends. The smaller campaigns, typically you're having a conversation directly with the candidate, and there's been some referral from previous business, and that's they make the decision about who to hire. And then, for the larger campaigns, I mean, if you're talking about a presidential race, that is a big sprawling organization, all 50 states. So you're dealing with various levels of staff and leadership on the campaign. And in that case, it's probably not likely that you're dealing directly with the candidate who really should be focused on other stuff like giving speeches and running the country and all that.
Raising millions and millions of dollars.
Billions in this case.
Billions. So I was going to ask you, just because you mentioned it, the outbound marketing, email, text, and such. This happened in the last cycle when Trump Biden in 2020. I ended up on a list of a bunch of Congress folks in states that I am not in. I was so curious about this from your perspective, because I come from a world like this. I think it's called the Spam Can Act. Like there's the marketing email rules around that. And I say to myself, well, my name obviously got sold somewhere to someone, but what a waste of money. Like send me the emails or market to me as a congressperson or a representative somewhere in Texas, and I live in New York. I can't do anything for them. I'm not going to give them any. And it wasn't like asking for like come to the polls and vote for me type of stuff. I'm so curious, like to me, it felt disorganized. And so I'm curious from your perspective as somebody who's worked inside of campaigns.
Sure.
Is there a lot of like operational deficiencies that happen because to me, it seems it's so fast moving. There's so many things going on. Things just get missed. I'm curious what your perspective is on that.
Yeah, that's a really good. I could tell a joke. Like, what is spam actually when it comes to campaigns, right? What are we even talking about? What is the spam thing? I'm not familiar with the term. So yeah, it's a really good question. So it looks like it's a little disorganized. So what's happened in the past several election cycles is we've seen a lot more selling of lists or leasing of lists. So you can actually lease an email list. And, if you have, for example, if you're a candidate in New Jersey and you are known for a specific set of policies or positions, and there's another candidate somewhere else, or a group, PAC or something in a different part of the country that stands for those same things, similar things. Maybe you're a little more progressive or something like that. You might ask if you can lease their email list to see if any of their donors would be interested in, or any of their email list members would be interested in donating to you. So it's not 100% effective. You're going to miss some, but the real thing is it's low cost for the most part to just cast a wide net in that case. So
sure.
You might not be donating to that candidate in Texas, but someone else might, and
sure.
a lot of that is very ideologically driven, particularly if you have, like, if you're running against a well-known opponent, like that's a big one, running against, sort of a villain, from the other party. Like the big thing for Republicans for a while, back in the Tea Party wave, was like ragging on Nancy Pelosi, which never really ended, but it's like we're running against Pelosi. Let's, even I actually, I had the opportunity to, guest speak in a class at Rutgers Law School yesterday, and we were talking a little bit about this. Like, oh yeah, when did you see like a negative campaign work really well against candidates? And I was like, in 2014. We were doing a couple of local races, and every single piece of mail that was sent out against our candidate had Nancy Pelosi on it. I'm like, is she running for council in like their town council or city council? And they'd be like, what is, but it was effective because she was sort of like the villain of that cycle for Republicans. So you do see that a little bit, like when, like in Texas, like if it's like Colin Allred, for example, is probably like one of the things that you got, running against Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz,
I think that's it.
A little bit of a villain, even among his own people, but not to get super political on that. But that's what you tend to see that, and like there are, so for every one of you or like five of you, there's maybe one person that will give a small amount, $5, $10, and it all adds up at the end of the day. So
sure.
So the real thing is it's actually fairly low cost, and there's generally, or at least historically, has been a fairly low risk to just casting a broad net. Eventually, we're going to see open rate. We've already seen this, like open rates decline on stuff like that. Certain types of like hair on fire messaging is not working like it used to. So like if you look in your spam folder, I bet you'll see at least a couple of emails with like the subject line, like we're packing our bags and going home, or like we're defeated or something like that, big capital letters. And that worked for a while, but then you get desensitized to everything. So like if you're the first mover in almost anything, you can make hay out of it. And then as the more that everyone else does it becomes a little bit harder to stand out in the inbox. So those are areas that we've kind of are keeping an eye on to say, okay, well, it's fairly low cost, but at a certain point, the cost will outweigh the benefit, based on, again, open rates. And we'll just have to figure out some other way to reach people. The same thing with the text, right? When that first came out, big winner, right? And now it's kind of leveling off because there are just so many texts coming through. So it's a constant game of like innovation. Very friendly.
It's so friendly. Hi, Jason. Hey. Hi, Jason. This is Vice President Kamala Harris. Would you like to join me for coffee in New Jersey? I'll be there. I'll be there next week or whatever. It's so friendly. It's
like your old friends, right? It's like, hey, it's
old,
your old buddy.
Friends. Your old buddy Kamala. Matt, I have a couple more. Yeah, exactly. I have a couple more questions about the politics that I want to expand into some of the other work you do, because like this obviously applies to doing this with private companies or nonprofits. The two questions I have, one is curiosity my own, is when you're going out and doing political consulting work in any discipline, like you said, there's a lot of disciplines. Do the candidates or campaign managers really care if you actually are aligned with them?
That's a good question too. So politics, even within a party, is a fairly diverse space. You're not going to agree 100% with every candidate. So you do try to filter on things where you feel like, so from our perspective, right, like in our firm, and I can't speak to how other consultants work in this space, but from our perspective, we generally try to, the first question we ask ourselves is, can we advocate vigorously for this client 100% of the time? If the answer is yes, then we should take that, and we can, even if we don't agree with everything, we know that we can actually do our jobs and not feel uncomfortable doing that.
I was gonna say without taking a shower 4 to 5 times a day. Yeah, like just feeling gross.
Yeah, that's right. If the answer is no, then I'm a big believer in like you should not cash the check. I mean, that's simple as that.
Yeah.
But I mean, not everyone feels that way. Like, and it is a business to some extent. There are a limited pool of candidates and things like that. But
Yeah.
so, do you always agree with everything that your candidate believes in? Probably not. But at the end of the day, you have to believe that they're going to be better than the other person running, and that's the end. So it's a comparative exercise, right? It's not like you're running against it's the old Joe Biden quote, right? Don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative. And that's very much true, right? There are alternatives. Every election is a choice between one thing or another thing, and as a consultant, you just make a decision about who represents the better thing in that equation. Then you ask yourself, can I do this? And if the answer is yes, then you do it. So you don't agree on everything. There are always going to be areas of policy that you'll perhaps butt heads on. You really do try, though, as a consultant, not to let your personal beliefs get in the way of sound strategy as well. So a big part of the political consulting communications and reaching out to voters is understanding where you need to meet voters where they are, and then when you need to lead them to another conclusion on something. And that's a very hard thing to do because you can't convince everyone of everything. It's a very hard thing to push someone off of a belief that they have about something, a very strongly held belief. So you have to be selective too in what sorts of things you talk about, what things are most salient or least salient with voters, and then kind of go from there. So that sort of factors into that. But in general, if you share the same principles, with a candidate, and the candidate approaches things with integrity, then by and large everything is going to be fine, and it's pretty smooth sailing. But again, you don't always agree on every policy, and there are certain red lines. I think every consultant is like, I will not work with people who do X or believe X or whatever. So that's sort of where we're at.
Yeah. So the second, thank you for that. And the second question, and I think this kind of leads us into the overarching scope of what you do outside of politics, is, you mentioned that you kind of kicked this off in 2011. There's been such a shift. I think it started with President Obama in 2008 that was the first social media campaign. And then of course we've got, Cambridge Analytica scandal in 2016 and all these things that didn't exist even 15 years ago. So I'm curious, like, what's the thing that you see what's the next innovation in this space that you think will make a difference? And we're recording this in an election cycle. We're recording this March 26, 2024. And there's a presidential election happening in, I guess that would be 8 months from now. So I guess what do you see as what might be an innovation or something that the general, for those Americans listening here, what might we see that could be new or innovative in this next cycle? Because it seems like every cycle, especially presidential, we're getting new things. Like you said, you got the text, you had the emails, we had social media back with Obama. What do you see as what's next?
I hope I'm wrong about this, but
oh no!
I'll just preface it. I hope I'm wrong somewhat, but I think this is probably where we're going to see some good things and some pretty bad stuff too. Is AI? I think everyone knew where I was going with that one, right? It was not hard to see where we're headed, but I think AI is potentially an area that is going to change things significantly from a number of perspectives. So number one, and here's the danger: generative AI, being able to generate images, video, and voice is very concerning. Barrier to entry on that stuff now, as it stands, especially on the voice generation, and even some of the video stuff, you can still kind of tell a little bit, but it's getting better. Every iteration is getting better, and as human beings, we don't evaluate things very closely either on social media. You're scrolling through your feed and you see something very quickly. It's not like you're going to examine things in a super critical way. So that is terrifying in that's ripe, unfortunately, for bad actors to take advantage of those types of things. So actually, this is funny. This is like another topic we were talking about last night in that class, was that I think there, just broadly taking a step back, has been a little bit of an erosion of this idea of a shared reality and a shared set of facts that we live under. Like, I think our realities and how we experience the world is diverging significantly. And it's very much colored by what we want to believe that we're seeing at any given moment. And AI certainly can feed into some of those pre-existing biases that we have. So if you believe, for example, a specific candidate is a certain way or believes a certain thing, or you just have this like kind of feeling in the background, and then you hear some AI generated voice, in a robocall say something that fits with that pre-existing bias, you say, see, I knew it. I knew that they were
that's frightening.
So it's a little scary. In other ways, AI can be quite useful in terms of also useful and scary at the same time in terms of scale. So you can analyze, and so that can certainly cause issues down the road because you'll be able to zero in on messages that are most effective, and sometimes the tweaks are minimal between slight variations of words that make a difference in how people think about different issues. So that could be one thing. In other ways, it could be very useful too, in that you can collect data or develop understanding of particular issues at scale in ways that you were never able to before. So I'll give you an example of this. So we've done some early stage. So we've invested in some early stage startups over the last couple of years to kind of stay on the cutting edge of some of these technologies. And one of them is a generative AI company that, basically, I don't know how I would characterize it, would be sort of like lightweight language models where you can quickly program stuff. You don't need reams and reams of data to train the model. But basically what you can do is train it to be a moderator for a focus group. So typically if you're doing a focus group, like qualitative research, you get a bunch of people, like 10 people in a room, you try to get some diversity and have those people be representative of the broader population that you're trying to understand. Yeah. And then you dig in deeply to their beliefs about certain things. So polling is a little bit different in that you ask a whole bunch of people what their opinion is, like yes, no, ranking scales, things like that are very easy to do from a quantitative perspective. The qualitative stuff, though, really helps you dig below the surface and truly understand the why of beliefs. So I think of like polling as like helps you understand what the beliefs are, and then like subtle shifts in language that could help, frame things in different ways that would be more persuasive or less persuasive. But the focus groups really help dig into the why of why people feel the way that they do. Now, imagine instead of doing 10 people in a room with one moderator, you can actually collect a huge sample, 1,000 people, right, with one AI moderator, which then can collect all of that data and help people dig into the beliefs of why. So now you have that understanding, qualitative research at scale, which is very interesting to us and probably beneficial because it can help understand a broader range of things and reduce, the amount of error that you would get just by having like 10, 15 people in a room. Instead, you have thousands of people and you can do it very quickly.
So that's brilliant. So my assumption would be for larger scale campaigns that data scientists and such are now full-time positions within campaigns. And that probably it was maybe a thing, but in a different way now because of all the information available. So if you're talking about a national campaign or a Congress or something with a large budget, they have data scientists on staff that are constantly looking and making recommendations. And now you're adding the generative AI on top of that around things like, my assertion would be, and I'm a big AI person, I love it, is like, what should I say to these people? What would be what are the words in this speech that are most likely going to hit the folks that I want that are like swing voters or something, which is interesting because I think like writing speeches and writing content, writing emails that used to just have to be done by people. Now generative AI can do a lot of that and do it with the data set.
Oh yeah, 100%. So it really is scaling a lot of that stuff. And you said, sort of during the Obama campaign was when a lot of the digital stuff started to happen. And that's when they started taking a look at a lot of the data science too, the modeling of the electorate. So that's sort of a subset or related sort of discipline to the polling and research pieces is then extrapolating those findings in a large scale poll and modeling exactly how specific voters feel about very particular issues, which is really interesting. And then you can score people based on whether or not you think they're going to turn out to vote, what they think about gun safety, for example, and different things you can model. All of that, you can create dynamic modeling to kind of track how a race is developing overall. So kind of get more real-time insights into how opinion is moving or isn't moving. So AI definitely will help, scale that process a little bit in a way that we haven't seen before, which could be helpful. Now, what I will say, this is kind of an interesting thing though, is like looking at campaigns from how they used to be, and I'm talking way back, this is pre-Obama, pre me being alive, actually, even on this planet. As a candidate, you used to be able to, for the most part, go on a couple of news shows, and the majority of the voting population would see your message and hear, and it would penetrate in a big way, right? So like it's a big broad thing, not specifically micro targeted to any one thing or the other, but you're kind of winning the overall conversation. And, that was the case for years. And then we kind of got into micro targeting, right? So then how do we persuade people that are interested in very niche kind of issues in the grand scheme of things and target them repeatedly with ads that specifically focus on that issue? So we did that for a little while. And I still think that's important, but I think we're actually coming full circle now back to a place where you really have to win the broader cultural conversation in these races, because our media environment is so fragmented that you're never going to be able to force your message into each of these spaces online that you have to be in. You almost have to do something so big and so broad and so interesting that it does filter into, like, if you look at podcasts, for example, like some of the biggest podcasts in the world, they have their audience that listens to them on wherever they get their podcast. But then the clips, right? The audience is so much bigger because of all the clips that filter into different places and talk about the cultural relevance of all of that. And it's not like it's being forced into those spaces. It's that people are taking, stuff and spreading it out. So I think we're kind of coming a little bit full circle in that we have to figure out how to kind of tap into the zeitgeist and win the overall cultural conversation and really like broadly communicate to the vibe of the moment, right? Like this is what we kind of joke about. It's like vibes-based politics, right? It's not specific policy stuff anymore. So. Yeah,
that's brilliant. I was thinking about, and I do have a couple of friends who actually do this, but I know I don't know many people that turn on Newsmax and watch an hour of Newsmax and then go and read the New York Times, right? It's like generally you go to the place that gives you the story you like, that kind of vibes with you generally. Like that's how I consume news, and I think most people do. So it's actually really hard, like you said, to get the larger scope of that, because I'm getting it fed to me through the thing that I've kind of chosen into that already feels good in a way. Or like, I mean, I don't know how it is for you, Matt, but like I like to listen to news that I agree with, which is a limiting thing for me. But it is nice to go like, oh, this person's talking about this thing and they have this point of view and they're interviewing this expert, and this expert's saying what I already believe to be true, which is like make me like, oh, my cognitive bias. And you even see this, like I'm thinking about the presidential debates in 2016 with Hillary and Trump. It was kind of a disaster, but I don't know that any of those debates swayed anybody. Because you already were like, okay, these people are this, and that they're going to show up this way, and they did it. It was kind of like, and then the election kind of showed that based on the results of those debates.
Yeah, I mean that's 100% true. So it kind of goes back to this idea of a shared reality eroding. So much of our information is governed by these algorithms that sort us essentially into like, oh, you like this video? I'm going to show you more of this and more of this and more of this, and then we're going to go further and further down that rabbit hole. So yes, I like to listen to stuff that I agree with and watch stuff that I agree with and read things that generally jive with, and also like provide sort of. So we talked a little bit too about, activating emotions versus like contentment type emotions. So like anger, activating emotions. So like if something makes you angry in a way that makes people like you angry, right? You're more likely to share that around. And so those are things that trigger reactions in our brain of like, oh, MSNBC showed me this thing. It makes me angry. I want to share it. Like, oh, and it goes on and on and on like that. If you're just happy and content with something, you're not very likely to share. No. And maybe not even likely to click through to read the thing, right? Unless there's some element of surprise or something interesting about it. But other than that, like if you're just happy and like content, that does nothing for
That's
clicks.
boring.
Doesn't, yeah, exactly. There's no engagement and happiness. So it's kind of sad, but I agree with that. I mean, like now for professionally, I have to try to get on the other side of TikTok, the other side of Instagram and see what's going on over there.
Yeah.
I don't like it. I don't like it at all. But like most people don't seek that out. And in fact, it's very hard to get there unless you are consistently consuming that sort of stuff. So it is very self-reinforcing that people do go to the spaces that they like to go to. Now, I will say that there are certain, I think I would be remiss in saying that like we can't both sides everything too. There are certain outlets that are doing as close to objective journalism as is possible, as human beings. And then there are outlets that are and influencers and personalities that are simply not. It is just bad faith. It is nonsense. It's not real. It's not based in fact.
No,
it's just a
lot more money in that though.
Oh yeah,
lot more money in the polarizations. Yeah, and the polarization. A lot more money in that. The middle is, I would say, the middle is boring. Oh, well, you were mentioning podcasts. Some of those popular podcasts in America are polarizing podcasts because that's interesting.
Very much
for people.
Yeah, very much so. Controversial, sometimes bordering on conspiratorial too. Like certain things. I'm obviously not going to start naming names and getting myself in trouble here. But there is a conspiratorial element to some of this. Like there's some nefarious things. So it almost actually makes you part of the in club, right? The in group. When you're a part of the conspiracy, it's like we as a community who listen to not this podcast, but a particular podcast know something that the rest of the population doesn't, right? We're in on the, like, we know that there's some nefarious thing going on beneath the surface. And like, there's some plan to, I don't know, depopulate the earth or whatever crazy stuff goes on. Like, or the COVID, we did a lot of public health communication around COVID vaccination.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That was a big one where a lot of conspiratorial stuff going on just beneath the surface. People forget that this is just really funny. People forget that the Trump administration, they were the ones that fast tracked that.
Totally.
And rightfully so, right? We were facing and that's the only time you'll ever hear me say anything like that. But that really was a thing that they should have done. And it was smart because people were dying and they had to move quickly on trying to find something that would prevent death. And guess what? It did. We're in a much better place today because of vaccinations than we were before. But you go into some of these spaces online and you hear there must be some other thing going on. There must be some other ulterior motive. Like, why would, they can't be safe. They're putting microchips in us, or you're going to be magnetic, or it's all sorts of stuff like that. And it kind of makes people again feel like they're in that in group. It's like the rest of you, lemmings out there, you're just following people right off the cliff. But me, I know exactly what's going on. I see the real thing. I am smarter. So it's kind of an interesting thing to see how that plays out in online. And it is self-reinforcing, because if you listen to one thing like that, then it pulls you into other spaces where they're talking about other stuff that's just like completely off the wall.
Just real quick on the conspiracy thing, then I want to pivot a little bit into some of the private work you do. I forget if it was a comedian or is it somebody I was talking to, and like I know there's things going on, Department of Defense and CIA, and there's things, NSA, there's things that happen that are actual conspiracies, I'm sure. But this big federal government conspiracy, I think the quote was like, these are people that can't even pass a simple law sometimes, and you think that this federal government has the wherewithal or the organization to like create this worldwide global conspiracy or things like this statistically improbable, based on the only way this is possible is if all the rest of the way it goes is actually fake, which would be just absolutely not, like, that would be astronomically improbable. Like some of these conspiracies that come out, I'm like, the level of organization that it would take and the level of nobody saying anything to have that actually be true would be unbelievable. And maybe it was a comedian. They're like, these are people who can't always show up to vote, or like can't pass a temporary budget so we don't shut down the government. But you're saying that they all are in this thing. I'm just like, yeah. Like it's Occam Razor is like, what's the most simple explanation? It's not that there's a massive government conspiracy around some of these things.
Oh yeah, I'll take it a step further with Occam's razor. So also, oftentimes it's not even the simplest explanation; it's the dumbest possible explanation for something. It's just that somebody stumbled into something, and a cascade of events occurred as a result of that. But I mean, even if you think about like a group of friends or acquaintances, right, and that group of friends, like you have some secret, right? There's some whatever.
Yeah.
Somebody in that group is bound to say something, right? Because like over time. So
totally.
And again, I'm not saying that like aliens don't exist or there isn't some sort of extraterrestrial life out there. I mean, there's a lot that we don't know, but like we also know for certain that we don't know everything. That's fine. Like that's okay. But like you're telling me that a group of any people, any amount of people on this planet are stashing the corpse of an extraterrestrial somewhere. Right. And haven't said, and nobody said anything. Nobody said anything. Seems pretty unlikely. Like if you just think about like you go out for drinks with your buddies, and someone does something embarrassing, and that friend, please don't. Can you just like not tell anyone about this? And it's like, no problem. And then the next day, it's like, oh man, did you see what Bill did last night? Man, that was crazy. And it's like, come on, man. It's the same thing. Yeah. Same concept. I like just cannot believe. And you're right. Like it's what you can chalk up, or what oftentimes people chalk up to, again, nefarious intent is oftentimes just pure incompetence.
Incompetence, exactly.
I joke about, so this is really funny. Whenever people ask me about like different sort of portrayals of political activity or government or in popular culture or different shows, right? They're like, oh, is it like House of Cards where it's they're plotting and thinking through all these issues, and they're like, it's like 3D chess and all that, or it's like, actually it's kind of like it's Veep for the most part. Like,
totally. Yeah.
It's Veep. Like, and Parks and Rec, right? Parks and Rec is another great, it's just like, think about every human being and it's just like, that's what it is. It's not some Nobody's crazy. That smart. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I mean, there are smart people doing smart things, but it's all above board. Like, and stuff does get done, but it's not, the super nefarious stuff, or like if something bad happens, oftentimes it's just a result of like a stumble or a screw up or some, funny thing. It's not like some plotting of like, Frank Underwood pushing a journalist onto the tracks of the metro and exactly. wearing a trench coat, like no one will catch you. So it's like,
exactly.
Yeah.
What the thing I'll bring up here to wrap on this is, I think about your home state and my neighbor state, Chris Christie. They shut down the New Jersey government, and then there's a picture of him sitting at the Jersey Shore in a chair by himself. Mm-hmm. People are like, oh yeah, he did this so that he could have. I'm like, no, I just think he doesn't have good judgment, or he did like he. Either he doesn't have good judgment, or he doesn't have people around him who tell him what he should and shouldn't do, because that was just poor judgment. I highly doubt that he was like actually scheming to shut down shut down the parks, and I think it was because of COVID, and then he's going to go out there and be like, oh, no, I get the beach to myself. Highly doubt that's what he was thinking. He wasn't thinking.
Yeah, 100%.
He wasn't thinking about the optics of it. Yeah.
Oh, or he didn't care. Like that was the thing, and it had nothing to do. Because he can go there anytime he wanted to. Like that is for the governor to use on Island Beach State Park. That whole area is for the use of the governor. You can go there anytime you want. You never have to deal with anyone else. Like there's no reason to shut down an entire government because of that. So it was pure stupidity, to your point. And it was like, okay, but I think there was an element of too of like, I actually don't care what people think. I'm just going to go do this.
He's like, whatever. Yeah. And I'm going to do it in my swimsuit. And
that was iconic. Yeah. So many good memes on that one.
Amazing. So many good. Yeah. So Matt, to wrap up here for today, how does this all then, you mentioned you do a lot of private sector work, nonprofit work. Mm-hmm. How does the work in politics relate in terms of what's same and what might be a different consideration when you're meeting with somebody in one of those spaces?
Sure. Yeah, we really do bring a lot of our experience from political campaigns to private sector clients. So there are a lot of parallels. So a campaign, really all a campaign is, it's a startup in a condensed period of time where you have to achieve a shared goal of getting someone elected, which is essentially selling a person, right? Selling an idea.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. You're dealing with crisis almost every day on a campaign, whether it's big or small. There's always something happening. So you learn very quickly. You figure out what works, what doesn't work. So, we bring a lot of those skills and a lot of those lessons to the boardroom when we're talking to our private sector clients. Again, a lot of things are just comparative exercises, right? Like, are you going to buy this thing? Or are you going to buy that thing? Are you going to have a positive view of this brand or a negative view of the other brand. So it's all sort of comparative for the most part. A lot of educating people about specific issues, figuring out how to frame things in a way that makes sense to people, which has been kind of interesting. And again, like battling back against a lot of the stuff you deal with in the political sphere, like disinformation, for example, like in renewable energy. Oh man, the amount of stuff that goes on there. I mean, the offshore wind stuff that we went through. I don't know if you followed that a little bit in New Jersey, but
yes.
Up and down the East Coast with the whales washing up and stuff. Nothing to do with offshore wind, but there was an information vacuum. People filled it, and it turned into a thing. Now, in terms of net effect, I don't think it actually did much other than make offshore wind a little bit more unpopular among one side of the political spectrum,
right?
Whatever. But like stuff is moving forward still. But in a state where you do have change of government, control from one party to the other, that could in fact have a huge impact on whether or not you can get stuff done. So we deal with all of those things in the private sector too, is like navigating those issues, navigating online, again, conspiracies, misinformation, stuff that just makes it really hard to make progress on certain things. So we do have those conversations, and we have a lot of, again, hard lessons learned on campaigns that we can bring to the boardroom to inform. And I think the other thing too is in the private sector, things are moving much more quickly from an information perspective than they did before. So that's a very useful skill set to have, for us coming into, because every day again is sort of this frenetic pace of one thing or the other that we have to deal with in the political world. And I think a lot of executives, people in the C-suite, they're starting to acclimate to this world of things are moving quick. Like, things can get out of hand really quickly. Communications can get away from you. Even if it's like a well-meaning campaign or well-meaning tweet or well-meaning, whatever it is, a lot of things can kind of take on a life of their own. Things might be tone deaf, right? And totally blind to sort of, again, the cultural moment that we're in. So, and that's all part of capitalism, which is kind of funny. Like people complain about like certain things getting canceled or not canceled. It's like, well, a lot of that is driven by consumer demand. So it's just, that's capitalism, right? Like it's what people want. And there's no law saying that you can't say this or can't say that. It's just, like there are consequences to saying things that are, not that the general population or your market or some other segment of the market doesn't like. And that's the game, unfortunately. So,
yeah. Well, Matt, I want to wrap up and ask you about some of your, like, something that's been done well in this space. And this can be something you worked on. You don't need to tell us it for confidentiality reasons, or just an example of like a good, I don't call it a PR campaign, a good campaign that you thought was really effective and done well. And, again, something you worked on, doesn't have to be like, what's something you point at and you go, hey, if you want to look at how to do this really well, Jason is outside, like somebody on the outside looking in, go look at how they're doing it. Because I can, it's funny as you're talking about this, I can think of so many examples of how to do this so terribly. And you know what I love about this topic? You know who does a great job of highlighting all the terrible ways this is done? John Oliver on Last Week Tonight with John Oliver. He just did the one on Boeing, and he was just highlighting just how absolutely tone deaf, or just thinking of other examples of things like the Aaron Rodgers stuff with like, talking about Jeffrey Epstein with Jimmy Kimmel, just like, and I know these guys don't really care, but like how dumb and how improvable. And there's so many examples of how this is done. So Alex Jones, great example, which cost him his career and a ton of money, how to do this so terribly. But what are some examples that we could look at of like how this has been done well, either politically or in, private sector or nonprofit?
Yeah, so I think one of the, just kind of going back a little ways, and this is sort of in the political, social sphere of things, is same-sex marriage. Thinking about how the Overton window, right, shifted, public attitude shifted on that issue over a relatively short amount of time was really the effort of a lot of very dedicated groups who did a great job of relaying human stories about how certain people experience life, and how those things are not all that different from the people that they were talking to. So they did a lot of work in doing like deep canvassing, right? Talking to people, kind of showing those similarities and overlap in lived experience and removing the fear from that situation. So I would say, like, in terms of overall, like, an effective campaign from a human rights perspective, and just from the perspective of just basically like getting government to leave people alone to, do whatever they want to do in their personal lives. I think that was an extraordinarily, powerful campaign. And it wasn't all one big unified thing, but there were pockets of campaigning and activism and communications that worked really well in that space. Again, looking at, the short window in which attitudes shifted dramatically in this country on that particular issue. And so I think it had a tremendously positive outcome again in that, you have people, your neighbors, your friends, your, even family members who are in this position where at one point they literally could not marry the person that they loved just because of some outdated thing. And so I think that was extraordinarily effective. I mean, again, it's so much easier to see. Like that wasn't super obvious though, that was the mistakes are always more obvious, to your point, right? Like the screw ups, the stuff with, Kensington Palace and Kate Middleton. Again, not to cast aspersions on that, because that's an incredibly difficult topic for people to deal with. But like, again, all the back and forth and the images, coming up on coming up as photoshopped and stuff like that, that sticks in your mind. But it's the stuff where you have the subtle victories where attitudes shift, where you can tell human stories, where you can kind of develop that, shared understanding and empathy for people around you. I think it was extraordinarily effective, and I think, a lot of the public health stuff during the pandemic, we were involved in. We're very fortunate to work with some really great organizations on that, and really truly understanding the barriers to getting people vaccinated early on, from that, and the number of lives that were saved as a result of those efforts, and understanding that some people had like sort of good faith concerns about the vaccine. Like, I mean, I did my own research. I know that's like a dirty word to say, like I did my own, but I did. I talked to my doctor. I talked to, which is a natural thing to do. And I think having empathy for people who are just like, I'm not so sure. And then there were certain groups too that had actual like historical reasons to have concern because of abuses of people in authority toward them, right? Like a lot of communities of color, a lot of Black communities suffered at the hands of people who were doing actual nefarious things to them. So there were some very good faith concerns there. And so you can't just dismiss that. So I think in those cases, like being able to have those conversations and, again, getting to a place of mutual understanding and lowering those barriers to understanding was extraordinarily effective, during that. Yeah. I mean, those are big ones that I would point to, and they're not always obvious, right? It's not always just some big, it's not like the fireworks go off at the end, right? Well, because they work and when they work, it's actually not that obvious because they're just doing what they're supposed to be doing. Right. I really appreciate that. To wrap this up, you brought this back, and we'll do a callback here. I was thinking about what we were talking about 20 minutes ago about government conspiracies. And then I think about outside of like the Kensington Palace stuff, it's obviously a very serious thing. So I'm not making a comment on any of that in terms of the actual health thing and the privacy and all that. It's very serious. And then you look at that, you look at that from a public perspective, and you go, these are folks that have arguably unlimited resources, and they can't Photoshop a photo correctly. Yeah. And you're telling me that and they're not obviously monarchy, not the government, but you're telling me that there is a global conspiracy that is done to perfection. Like when people, and the federal government, you could argue, has unlimited resources in certain ways, and they don't get it right most of the time. And I just laugh about that. Like, it's so improbable that there's this major secret that hundreds of or thousands of people are holding on to. And like you said, it's much more likely that it's Veep or Parks and Rec. Just a bunch of normal people with their thoughts, feelings, and egos walking around trying to make it work just like the rest of us. Well, 100%. Matt, this is awesome. I'm so glad we got a chance to do this. Thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate the work you do out there. I'm sure that we being people listening and myself, will likely see something that you're involved in here in the near future, and we won't even know. That's possible.
But you somehow had a hand in it. That's just super cool. So I really appreciate you and the work you and your firm are doing there, and keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Matt.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Talking to Cool People with Jason Frizzell. If you enjoyed today's episode, please tell your friends. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook, and give us a shout out, or take a moment to leave a review on iTunes. If something from today's episode piqued your interest and you'd like to connect, email us at podcast@jasonfrizzell.com. We love hearing from our listeners because you're cool people too.